with food, one of the biggest things that you can do with food and cortisol in particular, our stress hormone, is to curb your sugar intake. I know sweets are definitely a temptation. They taste really good. We can have these cravings, but unfortunately, when we eat excess sugar, it interferes with our adrenal function and our cortisol production. So it can cause more of our cortisol production issues to happen. Also, if we're not getting the balance of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that can interfere with our body's ability to make adequate, balanced amounts of our adrenal hormones. So those are, when it comes to food, those are some of the most important things that we can do. Welcome to the Woman's Doctor podcast, helping empower women to embrace their body and soul's full potential. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, and after 22 years of working with patients, I found the answers to our health struggles are much deeper than most people realize. To help explore this, I'm interviewing colleagues and other wellness experts to get to the root cause so women can realize their true beauty and be informed decision makers for themselves and their loved ones. Welcome to the Woman's Doctor podcast. I'm Dr. Trevor Cates, and today I do not have a guest. You have me again. And last time we talked about hormones and emotions. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to the last podcast, I encourage you to listen to it because I shared a personal story of how some emotional things for me have come up in the past that gave me opportunities for healing. And it related to hormonal imbalances and things that were going on from a physical level. So there's a really important connection between our physical and our emotional selves. And so today I want to just dive in more to talk about stress and how stress impacts our hormones and what we can do to create more balance in our lives. And I think it's important to first talk about how stress plays a role in our health and what happens with our hormones, because it is one of the most crucial things. And I know stress management might seem really simple, but there are some really specific things that you can do, which I'll talk about. And then also there are some really specific things that happen on a hormonal level that I think is good for us to know about. And then ways that we can really dive into the stress in a deeper way that you may have ever thought possible. So let's talk about stress. Stress is a normal part of life. Stress is part of being human, and being human is pretty awesome, but we do have these moments where stress gets to be too much. There's acute stress where we need to run out of a dangerous situation. A car is coming at us. We need to save our child. Whatever it is, that's when stress can actually be a really good thing to help us stay safe. But the problem is when our stress goes on and on, or when it's unmanaged, ongoing stress. That's when we start to get more health issues and other hormonal imbalances as a result of that, besides just cortisol. Now, cortisol is a hormone that comes from our adrenal glands, and it is known as one of our big stress hormones. And at the timing of this podcast, it is January, and winter time, cortisol tends to be higher. And in the summer, cortisol tends to be lower. Now, cortisol is not all bad, but the thing is that we want it in this Goldilocks perfect place. Not too high, not too hot, not too cold. We want it just in the right place. And so because if our adrenal glands are overproducing or unproducing, or our adrenal glands get overtaxed just because of the amount of stress that we're under, then we're producing perhaps too much cortisol, which can also impact other hormones like DHEA. And DHEA is a really important hormone, is another adrenal hormone that helps us with healthy aging. So if we're not able to make adequate amounts of DHEA because of cortisol producing too much, then that creates some issues for us. Also, DHEA converts to estrogen and testosterone, which are also important hormones for us. And then also, this pathway of DHEA converting to estrogen and testosterone is particularly important, especially after menopause, when our ovaries are no longer making estrogen and testosterone. So DHEA, our adrenals, can be another way for our bodies to make it and still get these important hormones. But if we burned ourselves out from too much stress, our bodies can't do all of these things. If we're making too much cortisol from excess stress, if we're just overly stressed, that also can create problems with the skin. So too much cortisol can actually break down collagen. So breaking down of collagen happens naturally, but we don't want to speed it up, because if we speed it up, we accelerate the aging process. So with breaking down of collagen, we'll see more wrinkles and sagging skin. And also with the skin, if we have too much cortisol, it worsens inflammatory skin issues. So especially if you're prone to inflammatory skin issues like eczema, atopic dermatitis, or even acne, and rosacea, any of these inflammatory skin problems could get worsened by too much cortisol. You also can have sleep issues from too much cortisol. So ideally, we want our cortisol levels to go up in the morning and low at night. But if our cortisol levels are still high at night, then we have a hard time easing into sleep. High cortisol ongoing can also create problems with weight gain. So a lot of times we'll get this weight gain around our midsection. I experienced that. When I was younger, I didn't know how much stress was playing a role in my health, and that is something that I commonly see. Our neurotransmitters are also impacted by cortisol. So much is impacted by cortisol and our stress. So our neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, drop. They get suppressed by high cortisol levels, which these neurotransmitters are known to help us with our mood and are already tend to be lower in the winter time. That's this time of year that I'm recording this podcast. Also, too much cortisol can suppress testosterone. So all of these things are interfering. All of these things, when we don't manage our stress, when we have too much cortisol, it can create all of these issues. And then also we need cortisol production to happen too. As I mentioned, it has a really important role in our health. So if we have too little cortisol, especially if we don't have that morning cortisol, then we may have a hard time waking up in the morning. We also may be less resilient to stressful situations if we don't have enough cortisol production. So it's not that we, always want more or we always want less. We want cortisol to be produced by the adrenals in the right amounts at the right time. So how do we do that? So we want to help support our adrenal glands in producing the right amounts of cortisol at the right time. And the sooner we kind of start to make these changes, the better, but it's never too late. But it kind of depends on how much stress you've had in your life and how much you've been taking care of yourself as to how far your adrenal burnout might be. But hopefully we're catching this early on enough where you don't have extreme cortisol issues or adrenal issues. But if you want to look into that, you can work with a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor to do some salivary testing to look at your cortisol levels and maybe some urine testing for around hormones to see where your levels are. And you might get some additional support. But one of the biggest things you can do is having to do with your lifestyle. And this has to do with your food, movement, mindset, and skincare. I talk about all of these things in my book, Natural Beauty Reset, which also gives a seasonal approach to all four of these areas. So we're in the winter season is when we really want to pay attention to our stress, to our cortisol, because that is when our mood, our stress levels, those tend to be more challenging this time of year. So, what causes stress? Like, what is going on in your life that causes this chronic stress? Not just the acute stress that we all experience, but what is it that causes your ongoing stress? It might be having to do with your responsibilities, like your job, or maybe you've taken on a lot of responsibilities of parenting, and maybe you have challenging relationships, health struggles, financial concerns. All of these things can create stress. And those are all normal parts of being human. We all have these stresses, but how we show up and how we manage this is really where it starts to impact our health. So, of course, these things are going to happen. Life is going to happen. And we also can recognize that we go through tough things. Life gets rough at times, and that's okay. But what do we do? How do we build our resilience to help us through these stressful times? And one of the things that I personally have noticed a lot of, both with patients and also with myself, is one of the hardest things that creates more of this stress is actually comes from ourselves, from our inner critic. We can be oftentimes our own worst critic, and we can beat ourselves up about things. We can be hard on ourselves. And we get these voices in our head sometimes of, oh, I'm not pretty, I'm not smart, I'm not successful, I'm a bad mom, not a good wife or partner, or the list goes on. And we look in the mirror and we pick at our flaws, or what seem to be flaws, but are just a normal part of life as humans, and skin issues and all of these things. But the problem is we oftentimes beat ourselves up about it. Now, some people do this more than others. And what I noticed is that I realized probably within the last year that I typically do this more than some other people I know. And I was like, why am I so hypercritical? And I actually ran across what some of you may have encountered, some of you may not know about. It's a program called Adult Children of Alcoholics. And so I'm sharing some personal things here. My father, unfortunately, was an alcoholic, and he passed away a few years ago. He was a very socially acceptable alcoholic because he was a winemaker. And so a lot of times he was just drinking wine, and it seemed like it was very much of a normal part of life. But now as I look back, I realize that there were some things that he was doing to kind of cover up some mental health issues that he was experiencing, with depression and things that were actually going untreated. And it's very unfortunate that my father never got therapy, he never got support, and he ended up dying from liver failure from drinking too much wine, of his own wine. So it's very unfortunate. It's been a very hard thing to work through personally. But this program, I know when I discovered it, Adult Children of Alcoholics, presented some really interesting information, and I thought I would share some of it with you in addition to all the other things that I'm going to recommend. If this resonates with you, you may be interested in this. Now, they also talk about in this program coming from dysfunctional families. So even if you didn't come from parents that were alcoholics, you may come from a dysfunctional family or had just parenting that wasn't ideal. And part of that was maybe critical parenting, or you didn't critical parents, or that you didn't really have the loving parent or the tools to understand how to talk to yourself. Now, for me personally, it wasn't so much that my parents were critical of me. It's more that I felt like I was really alone in life. So it was up to me to make the rules that I would live by. So I was really hard on myself, very critical of myself. And so this is kind of a newer awareness for me. I mean, I always kind of knew this to a certain extent. Part of it has been a good thing because it's what's driven me to achieve a lot of things, to write 2 books, to become a doctor, to practice, and to create docuseries and podcasts and do all these things. But there's also a part of it that's been really healing for me to look at how can I be more of a loving parent to myself? How can I reparent myself? And there's some really great tools that I've learned from that program. So that's something kind of new. I just wanted to share with you. And if that's something that resonates with you, go check that out. I think that there are also a lot of other tools that I have learned over the years from I have a master's degree in spiritual psychology and also just being a naturopathic physician, that these tools that I've just been bringing back up for myself to help myself through it has been very valuable, because ultimately, when we calm that inner critic and we have that loving parent, it actually impacts our neurotransmitters, our hormones, our cortisol levels, so that we can really get a hold of things. And then all of these other things that I'm going to share will become that actually work better for you. Because if you don't address these unresolved traumas, these unresolved issues, they're always going to keep coming back up to the surface for work. Believe me, I get it. I was kept turning away from it and ignoring it and not seeing this part for me. So looking at it, for me personally, stopped drinking alcohol and being completely sober. Not that I felt like I was an alcoholic, but I felt like alcohol was not playing a good role in my life. It was actually had created a lot of hurt and pain and suffering. I have to say, my father was absolutely fabulous. He's one of the reasons I became a naturopathic physician, encouraged me on my path. He was been one of my biggest cheerleaders. I had a very lovely childhood in many ways, but I think that all of us, to a certain extent, experienced parts of our childhood that were less than ideal. Partly because all of us are human. I mean, hey, I know I'm not a perfect parent. I know I've made mistakes with my children. I'm actually been talking, now all my children are pretty much adults. So I can have these conversations and say, hey, I'm so sorry if I didn't show up for you in the ways that I meant to. Because the thing is, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. Our parents made mistakes. Their parents make mistakes. Our great-grandparents, many generations of trauma and hurt, but also it creates a lot of healing opportunities. There's also a lot of beauty in our family lineage. And I've learned so much from my family, from my parents, and they had their struggles. They also had their blessings they passed on. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm just complaining here. I think it's true for all of us, though. We want to take a balanced look at what is the hurt that's come up for us? What are the things that we can learn from? And what are the things that are part of our true essence, our true nature that we want to return to? Because a lot of what we're exposed to in our lifetime takes us away from our true nature, from our inner beauty, from our authenticity. And if we can get back to that and heal these wounds, so much more of this inner light, this natural beauty, true nature, whatever you want to call it, we can return to more of that. And so that's what my goal has been for myself and what I'm hoping for you as well. So let's talk about some more of the solutions. I talk about some of these in my book, Natural Beauty Reset. I want to share some of these with you around food, movement, mindset, and skincare, really to help support our hormonal and neurochemical imbalances. With food, one of the biggest things that you can do with food and cortisol in particular, our stress hormone, is to curb your sugar intake. I know sweets are definitely a temptation. They taste really good. We can have these cravings, but unfortunately, when we eat excess sugar, it interferes with our adrenal function and our cortisol production. So it can cause more of our cortisol production issues to happen. Also, if we're not getting the balance of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that can interfere with our body's ability to make adequate, balanced amounts of our adrenal hormones. So those are, when it comes to food, those are some of the most important things that we can do is really looking for that balance, as well as making sure that we're trying not to overdo it with sugar consumption, and that looking for, if we're looking for something sweet, maybe have some fruit or something sweetened with stevia, maybe some nice herbal tea, whatever it is, it can kind of give you that sense. And then also realizing that sometimes when we crave food, especially sugar, that we're actually not hungry. We're not actually hungry for food or fuel. We're hungry for something emotionally that we're not getting. So it might be an opportunity for you to really dive in and dig deep to like some of the work that I've been doing, try and figure out what it is that is still coming up for healing. The other thing is movement. Movement is really important to help with our hormonal balance and help with our stress management. And one of the things that we can do when it comes to movement is try and exercise and get outdoors early in the morning when we get that sunlight, because that's going to help with our morning cortisol to get that going. So getting outdoors, getting moving in the morning hours, and try not to exercise too close to bedtime, because sometimes that can be too stimulating, especially if you're going for a run or something that's more stimulating. And then, as I always talk about skincare, we never want to forget this part, because there are endocrine hormone disrupting chemicals that are in so many of our skincare products. And when we get exposed to these chemicals, it can interfere with our hormone production, including our adrenal hormones, cortisol and DHEA. So we want to be careful and mindful of reducing our exposure to these by avoiding things like synthetic fragrance. And you can find more of a full list of things in either of my books. I think both of my books, Clean Skin from Within and Natural Beauty Reset, have a full list of a nice list of endocrine disrupting chemicals that you want to avoid. So then I want to shift now and spend some time talking about mindset, because it is one of the biggest things that we can do to help us with our cortisol and our stress management. Some of the tools that I have found over the years and over the last 10 years, in particular since getting a master's degree, is doing journaling. And journaling is such a powerful thing. I try to journal almost every day. Sometimes I don't always get there, but I try and do journaling. And one of the things you can do too is get loose leaf paper, and not in your journal, have your journal separate, but loose leaf paper, and do free form writing. I talk about this in my books, where you just write down anything that's negative, that's coming up, that's emotionally triggering. You can also do this by talking through things with people. That can be a nice release, but sometimes it's hard to share some of our deep, dark thoughts and negative inner critic stuff. Sometimes it just doesn't want to come out our mouths, but we can write it. So if writing is something that's very freeing for you, this could be a really great exercise. So you just write everything down on as many pieces of paper as you need. And the important thing is not to read what you wrote, because this is a way of releasing. You don't want to recycle it back into you. So just write whatever in like curse words or, whatever it is. You can write a letter to someone that you feel like you want to get something off your chest. Just write it all down. And when you feel like it's complete, then burn it. Just burn it, get rid of it. If you need to shred it, you can do that. But it's a really great way to release things. And also expressing then in your journal, you can take the takeaways from that. What are the positive things that you learn from this? What are the things that you know to be true about your true nature, about your inner beauty? And what are you grateful for? Those are the things that you want to put in your journal, and so that you can reflect and look back to those. And then you can also take this time for some reparenting. If you're not familiar with this work, there's a lot of information on this, and hope to cover more of this in future podcasts about ways that you can reparent if you didn't get some of that parenting tools as a child or as a teenager. You didn't get that support, which many of us didn't. I think actually I don't really know of anyone that had perfect parents. And so, getting that kind of re-parenting experience and having more of a loving parent that speaks to you, and some inner dialogue and retraining that, letting that inner critic, just letting that go and trying to have more of a loving parent, self-talk with yourself. And there's a whole process on that I don't have time for today, but I just want you to be aware of what's possible. Start opening up these doors for you and awareness of things the tools that could be really helpful for you. Another thing that I find really fantastic is I'm a big fan of getting into nature. At the time of this recording, I'm actually in Tokyo, Japan. I've been here with my son and my husband for the last 10 days, and we've been immersing ourselves in a lot of outdoors here and in Kyoto and Osaka. And while we're in Kyoto, we went to the bamboo forest. And one of the things that there's actually research on is forest bathing. So immersing yourself in the forest has actually been shown in research to help reduce cortisol, reduce blood pressure, and improve your mood. So as I was in that bamboo forest, and if you've never seen pictures of it, check it out. It's just this incredible, you're just surrounded by bamboo trees that go on and on and on. And there are many other forests here and gardens, Zen gardens, so many beautiful places that we've been to immerse ourselves in the trees, in the sunlight, in nature. And everywhere around the world, we have these places, even in Tokyo, which is the most heavily populated city in the world where I am right now. We were just in a garden and in the middle of a city. So there are always ways to reconnect with nature, and it is free, it's easy to get out there, and it's a great way to help with stress management. Another really fast way to reduce cortisol is laughter. Laughter actually decreases cortisol, and it helps with dopamine and serotonin. It kind of gives it a boost. It also helps with boosting our immune system, improves social bonding, decreases pain, and instantly shifts us into a positive mood. And so that's another one that is available to all of us. And sometimes when we're particularly down, we don't really feel like laughing, but when we can use laughter, it is really great medicine. You can also look at ways to have a spa day, and because having a spa day, even if you're doing a DIY skincare at home, or you can find someone else in your home, a friend or a family member, to do a spa day with you, that reduces cortisol, boosts oxytocin, especially if you have that connection with someone else. And oxytocin is the hormone that's released that helps us bond with others and helps us have a sense of peace in the world. So it's a really important hormone to help us with stress management. Research also shows that a spiritual practice can decrease anxiety and depression, boost your melatonin and serotonin, and lower cortisol. So having a spiritual practice, whatever that is for you, but incorporating something of a sense of a higher purpose, of a higher being, whether that's God, whether that's Jesus Christ, whether that's Buddha. I'm here in a land where they're celebrating a lot of Buddhism. So whatever it is that is your spiritual practice, to connect with that, to really use that as a way of getting out of the darkness. Because when we return to the light, there's no way for the darkness to be there. So that's a great way to help us expel some of that trauma and that negative mood that dark clouds that can come over us, and that light can really shine through. So those are some of the mindsets, some of the mind, body, spirit connections. There are also natural remedies and things that you can do to help support your adrenal glands and to help support your hormone stress connection. Things like adaptogenic herbs, ashwagandha, rhodiola. These are really great. We have a stress supplement at the spa doctor. You can get some of that. There are lots of other supplements out there that can help with managing stress. You also might want to get your vitamin D levels tested, because vitamin D is also very important for cortisol and for our mood. So if your vitamin D levels are low and you want to ask your doctor, you might want to get your vitamin D levels tested, because vitamin D is really important for our cortisol production, for our adrenal production, and also for our mood overall. So you can ask your doctor for 25-hydroxy vitamin D. It's an easy thing to test in basic blood work and get added to your basic blood work. And if your levels are low, then you can supplement with a vitamin D3 supplement. And so those are ways that really can help support you. Again, if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you are thinking that your cortisol levels are really out of balance and you need additional support, you can work with a functional medicine or naturopathic doctor to get those levels tested and figure out what's, a more individualized approach. But I really hope these tools today help you with building a foundation. Whatever is going on with you, these all work so beautifully together. The food, movement, mindset, skincare, all of those are important to help you, not just on a physical level, but an emotional level, and even on a spiritual level. All of this connects in together to help you really get back to your true nature, to get back to that inner beauty that really help that radiate and shine. So I hope this helped give you some tools today. Whatever resonates with you, start doing that today. And I will see you next time on the Woman's Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode of the Woman's Doctor podcast, be sure to share it with the women in your life and rate and review the show. And to learn all about balancing your hormones, join us for the Hormones, Health, and Harmony 9-part documentary series at hormoneseries.com.